How's it going, and welcome to my continued guide series on Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. In today's video, we will be taking a look at Chapter 4, Destruction's Light. This chapter has a lot of game mechanics going on, and it has a lot of ramifications for those consequences. Before I go into anything major though, I must warn you that there will be spoilers, so players that actually plan on playing on this adventure do not watch. But if you're a DM and want some added insights on how this actually is supposed to function, then go ahead and stick around because we have a lot to go over. So here we are. This is the map that we are working with. Your players arrive at Sunblight, and as they climb up that tower, they look up and see a dragon soaring over and making its way over to the 10 towns, where they will now have to go ahead and try and save the day and destroy the dragon. Here's the thing though, we've already been over the math a little bit, and saving the 10 towns is not very likely as per written. But for the instances of this video, I'll be going ahead and showing off what it is like if you are going to be running it more along the lines of as written. I already did a video, of course, on ways you can adjust that so your players actually have a chance. So why do I keep saying the players don't really have a chance? Well, we get this nice little table here on the dragon flight times, and in addition, we get information on how much time the dragon spends on each individual town. So we've already added up all the numbers, and in total, this dragon's flight is going to take 56.5 hours to fly to every town and destroy everything. Now, 56.5 hours, that sounds like your players should be able to go ahead and stop this thing in time. Well, actually, unfortunately not really, because of several things. One, it already makes its way to East Haven by the time the players could have ever possibly arrived there. If you combine both the travel time and the destruction of each town time, it makes its way to East Haven in the span of only 4.5 hours, and as we've already mentioned here, your players are not going to be able to get there in time. Your players are going to be racing against the clock trying to get there. And as a reminder, as per written, dog sled only goes 1 mile per hour, so, it's a decent amount of time to get to every single location. Once your players actually arrive to the 10 towns, going along the trails does make travel a little bit quicker, but it is not fast enough. It really isn't. Your players are going to be in for the race of their lives, and more so, they're not going to be able to really race this thing. They're going to go out the head and just skip a couple of the towns and make their way to any of the locations before the dragon actually arrives there. But here's another kicker. Your players say, you know what, we're going to go ahead and jump up to one of the towns and make sure that we can intercept this thing. Then what happens? It states here that if the characters deal 30 damage or more to the dragon and it's not destroyed, it's going to go ahead and fly away. Simple as that. And more so, it's going to fly to the next town, and it's going to fly way faster than your players are able to travel. Meaning that your players go ahead and abandon several towns, they beat the dragon to the location, and then they deal a little bit of damage to the dragon, and the dragon just flies off. And then now they're stuck in this rut where they once again have to abandon several more towns and try and cut this thing off. Realistically, it's really not going to work. But before I get into any of the mechanics of how the dragon fight's going to work, let's go ahead and discuss how the chapter actually flows. So your players see this dragon come out of Sunblight, and they say, hey, we got to go ahead and stop that thing, and let's go ahead and go back. Your players, as they make their way down, are going to be met by one Vellyne Harpell, and she's going to be bringing with her a slew of Icewind Dale kobolds, some of them dead, some of them alive, and they're going to be accompanied by dog sleds. And she's going to go ahead and say, hey, I'll go ahead and bring us back to the 10 towns to save the day, but there's something I want from you. She wants the players to help her get the Codicil of White, because she believes if she gets the Codicil of White, she'll be able to open up the Ragged Glacier, and once she opens up the Ragged Glacier, she'll be able to get to the lost city of Ythryn. Of course, if this is the first time your players are meeting her, this is going to sound a little bit crazy, and it's probably going to take a bit more time to elaborate on what's going on here. So as your players are traveling with her, you should have her reveal more and more about this area. Or, my suggestion, of course, is to have Vellyne Harpell already introduced into the campaign. So, of course, we've already been over the dog sled thing. It's going to take ages to get to the towns. But what really sucks here is it suggests that if the players are not sure where to go, that Vellyne Harpell is going to just say, hey, let's go ahead and head over to Brynchander. Which sucks because Brynchander is the last town that's going to get hit. And wouldn't you know, the thing is going to destroy everybody beforehand. Vellyne Harpell is given a pretty cool stat block here. She is an 8th level spellcaster, so she's got a lot of spell slots here, and she's got a lot of fun spells she can go ahead and work with. And what's also really telling about her character is the fact that she is a necromancer, and at the same time, she will also use a vampiric touch to make sure that she lives. She'll go ahead and either slap one of her kobold assistants, one of the kobold zombies that she has under her control, or some poor individual that she comes across. She also has wand of magic missiles and bracers of defense, which are always fun things to have. She is here in Icewind Dale to search for the lost city of Ythryn, but at the same time she's also competing against the other Arcane Brotherhood members because they all are just antagonists toward each other. In addition to looking for the lost city of Ythryn, she's also looking for an object that was stolen by one of the Arcane Brotherhood members, Nas Lantamir. Nas Lantamir stole a Professor Orb, which is essentially a orb that has basically a backlog and a catalog of information, and it's very, very useful and an extremely great way to give your players some exposition. Vellynne wants this object because it belongs to her, of course, and it has a lot of information on the Netherese, and that will be very important for the future to come. So Vellyne Harpell is going to tell your players all about the Arcane Brotherhood, and she's going to tell them how she's searching for the Lost City. She's going to go ahead and say, hey, I know you want to look for the Lost City too, because there could be some powerful magic in there. There could be some incredibly useful tools that could help stop O'Reil's Everlasting Winter. And of course, there could be some great swag in it for you as well. And telling your players this, telling them that the MacGuffin for this campaign, the way to stop O'Reil, is located in the Lost City, is going to be the driving factor for your players to actually go there. It is going to be the factor to get your players to go all the way to O'Reil's abode, pull off a caper, come all the way back to Icewind Dale, trek all the way across the Ragged Glacier, go through the Caves of Hunger, and then plunder the Lost City. Now, what this MacGuffin is, she doesn't know. She just thinks that there could be some very powerful magic in there, which she is correct in that regard. There is a lot of powerful objects that can be located in the Lost City. And of course, they can be the things that help your campaign wrap up as your players get a really powerful scroll that they can call down upon O'Reil, or they get some powerful magic items, or they just, end the world and reverse time and all that fun stuff. So thankfully, Vellynne has a lot of time to tell your players all this as they're making their way back to the 10 towns, because it's going to take hours to get back to the 10 towns. So your players can do their whole 20 question spiel and get to know her a little bit better, and they can try and suss out what she knows. And if your players have already had interactions with previous Arcane Brotherhood members, they might draw their own conclusions as well. If your players already met with Avarice, they might think that all the Arcane Brotherhood members are evil. If they've already met up with Zan, Zan might have said that, oh, she's just, a scumbag using her family name to try and get everything she wants. So once again, introducing all of the Arcane Brotherhood members early is a great way to have your players, glean insight on all the other Arcane Brotherhood members. So now let's go over what happens at each individual town that the dragon arrives in. Because as per written, your players are not going to make it to anywhere before the dragon gets there, besides maybe East Haven if you're feeling lenient. But of course, if you do many of the additions we've talked about in a previous video, then your players could intervene at any given time. In Dugan's Hole, every structure is destroyed in 30 minutes time, and half of the population is killed. Mind you, half of the population of 50 is only 25, so that's not that big of a deal. But still, 25 people are now homeless. They're going to be trekking across the tundra and trying to make their way over to Bryn Shander. In Goodmead, almost every single building is destroyed except for the mead hall, but this destruction lasts for an hour. 25 people of the 100 people population of this town are killed, and eventually the dragon makes its way over to East Haven. East Haven is where the dragon is going to meet its first bit of resistance, because East Haven is one of the bigger towns around. The dragon, of course, is not stupid. It is going to do what dragons do. It's just going to go ahead and fly along and using its radiant breath and destroy huge swaths of the population and fly out and not get hurt. Half of the town is destroyed in the 8 hours. 250 people are killed. But what's very important to note is that people aren't just getting killed by the dragon. There's a whole bunch of Durgar that are waiting in action and assassinating people. Thankfully, the town militia is big enough and is able to do some damage to the dragon. They are able to do 10 points of damage to the dragon in total, which isn't that bad. In chardylyn, everybody that's not in the castle is killed. All of the buildings except for the castle are destroyed. And once again, they're not only destroyed by the dragon, they're also getting killed by the Duergar that are waiting around the area. And what's also important to note here is it looks like Xardrak actually knows about the cult because he intentionally leaves the cultist in that castle. He basically wants them to suffer, which is, pretty devastating. In Caer Konig, every single building is destroyed in the span of 1.5 hours, and 1/3 of the population is killed, 50 people. What's really sad here is, once again, people are not only getting killed by the dragon, but also the Duergar. And as they make their exodus to chardylyn, they try to get into the castle, but the cultists don't let them in. And along the road, they are killed by even more Duergar. Speaker Trovis, who was comically the town drunk, was drunk during the time and was not able to put up any resistance at all. And what's really sad here is it states that he gives up the bottle. I don't know about you, but if I went through like a massacre like that, I'd probably become even more of an alcoholic, but whatever. In Tourmaline, all buildings are damaged to some degree, maybe not all destroyed, but many of them damaged. Thankfully, a lot of the townspeople were able to make their way into the mines and thus didn't have to be outside when the dragon was fighting, but the town militia stayed. The town militia is killed, 20 people are killed outside in their homes, and another 30 residents are killed in the mine by Duergar saboteurs. So a lot of people dead, but hey, those militia were able to put up some resistance and they did 5 points of damage to the dragon. Because Lonelywood is so close to Tourmaline, they were able to see the destruction. They were able to see, of course, a figure floating around and shooting out a beam. So they were all able to make their way onto the boats and get themselves out of the town. So thankfully, when the dragon hits the town of Lonelywood, it goes ahead and destroys all of the buildings, but nobody is killed. When the dragon flies over to Bremen, it's going to see a whole bunch of ships and destroy them, and then it's eventually going to arrive in Bremen, and in the span of 2 hours, destroy majority of the buildings, and most important of all, killing 100 people, a pretty decently sized population. Bremen's militia was able to get in a good blow and dealt a whopping 5 points of damage to the dragon. Targos is another big hit for the dragon here. As it makes its way over to Targos, it spends a whopping 8 hours strafing the place and eventually trying to reduce this place to rubble. In that span of 8 hours, 500 people are killed by the dragon or Duergar that are roaming around the town. And thankfully, they are able to put in some dents into the dragon. They deal a whopping 15 points of damage to it. And last and certainly not least, the dragon finally hits Bryn Shander. And by the time it hits Bryn Shander, the town's population is going to swell by people retreating from whatever town they came from. So the population balloons from 1,200 all the way up to 2,700. But of course, during the course of the battle, over the course of 12 whole hours that the dragon's strafing this thing and eventually landing down and attacking, is going to be disastrous. The dragon and all the Duergar are going to kill 200 people every hour during this 12-hour assault. And when it's all said and done, if your players don't interact at all whatsoever, then only 300 people are going to be left. What is cool to note, though, is that because there's so many people here and the tested militia, they're able to do 10 points of damage in the first 6 hours as it's flying around. And then once the dragon lands down and starts picking people off, they're able to do 5 points of damage per hour, meaning that over the span of that next 6 hours it's on the ground, you're of course going to be doing 30 points of damage to it. So of course, this timeline only happens if your players don't interact at all whatsoever with the dragon and you don't change anything at all. That means your players just sit around and do nothing. That means your players head into Sunblight and, just don't care about the dragon. This is the final aftermath that we see. And we can clearly see that it's terrifying. All the thousands of people that reside all up in the 10 towns are now homeless, everything's destroyed, and most important of all, if your players didn't deal with the Duergar and didn't deal with the dragon, and the dragon's able to make its way back to Sunblight, then it can go ahead and get repaired, and over the course of however many days it takes to repair this thing, it's going to finally get fixed up, and it's going to fly all the way back and repeat the process. And this time is definitely going to go ahead and destroy everything, and all of the townspeople are going to die. So of course, that's the grimdark reality of if your players don't show up to any of the towns and don't interact with the dragon at all whatsoever. But, of course, there's the possibility that your players intervene and jump into any one of the 10 towns and are able to fight the dragon there. So what does that fight actually look like? Well, unfortunately, this thing's a dragon, and it's not going to be stupid. It's going to go ahead and fly overhead, it's going to use its breath weapon attack, and then it's going to fly out of range and wait until its breath attack recharges and repeat the process. And once it's done enough damage as it could, it will go ahead and land down and start laying the hurt on everybody. So obviously, commoners with clubs aren't really going to be doing too much against this thing because they're going to be terrified out of their mind. They're not going to be willing to stand around and fight this thing. And presumably they're just going to get murdered left, right, and center. So realistically, this is only something that the militia can even possibly think to handle. And of course, your players. And to add insult to injury, to pour salt on the wound, if that wasn't enough, the fact that this dragon's flying all over and destroying everything, it states here that the weather conditions are, after hitting the town of Tourmaline, a blizzard hits all of Icewind Dale. And this blizzard, what it does is it gives a strong wind and heavy precipitation. What do those do? A strong wind is pretty significant. It gives a disadvantage on all ranged weapon attack rolls and a disadvantage on perception checks that rely on hearing. And then the heavy precipitation gives you disadvantage on perception checks that rely on hearing. So what this is saying is, after Tourmaline, there's a blizzard that's affecting all of the 10 towns, and everyone has disadvantage on all perception checks, and most important of all, disadvantage on ranged weapon attacks trying to shoot this dragon. Oh my goodness, this dragon wasn't already deadly enough, and now all those poor people shooting bows are now like half worthless? So there's just a lot of factors going in here on why this fight is just ridiculous. But thankfully we get some fun little things that we can be doing in the meantime, so you can actually have some fun roleplay elements and of course some other factors going in. If your players are in a town and they're trying to fight the dragon, then helpful 10-towners can join in on the fray. The NPCs can give the help action. The NPCs can go ahead and drag people that are injured. The NPCs can move in close to the dragon and provide assistance such as like sneak attack and other such various effects. That's really nice because sometimes, your rogue doesn't have any friends that are close up. Sometimes you just need that helping hand to give you advantage on a weapon attack. These things really help out, and they actually really add to the flavor of, maybe that brave commoner steps up and tries to help and then gets bushwhacked. That lovable NPC tavern owner you guys know and love goes in and joins the fight, and you're weighing like, oh, we really need them, but at the same time, we don't want them to die. That's really cool. So we get this little section here on what Vellynne can do, and it does something that I believe to be a cardinal sin in any role-playing game. It says, during the encounters, Vellynne can't drop below 1 HP. Never ever introduce characters that can't die, because players will catch on to that, and that's lame. If she dies, that's it. Don't worry about it, because there's more than one way to introduce the rest of the quest to your players, and you don't need Vellynne to do it. She will be going ahead and casting some magic missiles from her wand of magic missiles. She'll be going ahead and trying to help out all the townspeople, and she won't be getting herself too involved in the dragon fight because, why would she, right? I personally wouldn't want to go ahead and fight a dragon. That's just me. So what do you do if you have your players show up to one of the towns and the dragon's going ahead and strafing the place and you don't have that many ranged people? And do you really want to just sit there and roleplay out, oh yeah, you gotta dodge a whole bunch of dragon breaths? No, that sounds boring. What is cool though is we get this nice little list here on other things the characters can be doing. This list is actually really well done in my opinion. We have a building collapsing, we have enlarged Duergar rampaging around, invisible Duergar about to assassinate you, malevolent townsfolk that are getting turned by the dragon. We have thieves that are taking advantage of all of the destruction. A trapped beast which your players can go ahead and try and save. And walking wounded, someone that your players can go ahead and, arm. Definitely use this. This is fantastic. Your players show up to one of the more densely populated towns such as East Haven, Tourmaline, Targos, or Brinchander. And they're trying to take on this dragon, but you go ahead and say, hey, this dragon's going ahead and strafing. In the meantime, all of this fun stuff happens. This makes the world feel real, right? The fact that your players aren't just going up and fighting a dragon willy-nilly. This thing is actually going around and causing some destruction. Mind you, don't have them doing absolutely everything at once, right? Peter these out over the course of time. Your players show up to Tourmaline and say, yeah, for the first, 4 hours, 4 of these events happen, and go ahead and roll. And that is really cool because your players are going to be struggling, right? As previously mentioned, this whole event is going to take the span of 56.5 hours. And it's more than likely your players are not going to be able to rest during this whole time. So just imagine, it's dark, it's gloomy, people are dying, a dragon's flying around destroying everything, walking wounded and dead everywhere, and your players are just on the move constantly. They're tired, they're weak, they're hungry, they're thirsty, all these things are battering against them and just making lives miserable. Play that up because that is going to get your players into the mindset of what their characters are going through and the arduous struggles that they are going up against. And once again, use this art to your advantage. Once your players get the idea of the destruction that this dragon is causing, show them the art pieces like this and the other one. This is fantastic stuff. This is how you get your players involved in everything that's going around here. Tell them how dark it is, how cold they are, how they're feeling. Use the 5 senses because that is going to make them feel alive in the moment. Or in the case of this poor ranger here, maybe not so alive pretty soon. So your players finally catch up to this dragon and they are able to go ahead and fight this thing on air quote equal footing as it lands down. What are they going to be in for? Unfortunately, they're going to be in for the fight of their lives. Depending on what level you run this encounter at, this will be an easy TPK or it will be the hardest fight of their lives. If you, of course, upscale this adventure and allow your players to be much higher level, then this will be a lot easier, specifically if they are in the higher ranges such as 8th or 9th level. But definitely a 5 through 7 group is going to have a tough time with this. This creature has 17 AC naturally. This creature has 147 HP. The creature, most important of all, can fly 90 feet. This thing can go zooming past. Nobody's going to be able to catch up to this thing, really. It has resistance to radiant, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing that is non-magical. It's immune to cold and immune to poison. It's immune to charm, exhaustion, frightened, paralyzed, petrified, and poisoned. Makes sense. This thing has an immutable form. No polymorphs around here. It has magical resistance, advantage on all magical saving throws. It's a siege monster. It does double damage to objects and structures. And also, the unusual nature, this thing doesn't require food, drink, or sleep, and it gains no benefit from a short or long rest. That is kind of a big deal because a normal dragon would go ahead and fight, and if it got injured, it'd go ahead and rest up for like an hour's time and then head back to the fight. This dragon can only get healed if it heads back all the way to Sunblight and, gets forged again. So every bit of damage that is going up against this thing is permanent, which is very nice. The dragon has multi-attack. First off, it uses its malevolent presence. It then makes 3 attacks, 2 with its claws, 1 with its tail. If the dragon isn't flying, it can also make 1 attack with its wings, which is huge. This dragon has a plus 11 to hit, so all those people who have high ACs are going to be crying when you roll low numbers, such as, 5, 6, 7, and you're still hitting them. And even more so, you're putting out a bunch of damage when you hit them. The claws do 2d6 plus 7, the tail does 2d10 plus 7, the wings do 2d4 plus 7. Not that bad. But just overall, the amount of damage that you're putting out with this thing constantly is insane. You're constantly hitting people, and you're doing a ton of damage. But arguably, those attacks aren't the real reason why this dragon is deadly. The malevolent presence is disgusting. Each creature within 30 feet that has an intelligence score of 4 or higher has to make a DC 16 wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they are charmed for 1 minute and can repeat the saving throw at the end of their turns. But if they fail, then on their turns, they're going to go ahead and march over to the closest target that the dragon deems, and they're just going to go ahead and attack. Meaning that townspeople are turning against townspeople. Your players are going to turn against each other. And the scariest combo of all, really, the towns players turn on the party or the party turns on the townspeople. That's kind of sad, really. And that is, in fact, one of the events in the showdown area where your players go up against a whole bunch of charmed individuals and your players have to weigh the moral struggle of, oh man, do we have to go ahead and, expend all of our resources fighting these commoners? How are we going to go ahead and handle this? And of course, the deadliest thing of all, the thing that is destroying all of the towns, the Radiant Breath attack. This recharges on a 5 or a 6 at the start of its turn. And the dragon can go ahead and exhale a radiant energy beam that shoots a 120-foot line, 5 feet wide, and each creature must make a DC 16 dexterity saving throw or take 7d8 radiant damage. That is tremendously strong. That thing is pretty much comparable to a lightning bolt, except for the thing that not many people can actually pull off resistance to radiant damage. And most important of all, this thing can constantly get it back. It gets it back a third of the time, and it's going to use it whenever it can. It's going to line up targets when it can. This creature is not stupid. It's probably just as intelligent as the average person in your party. It's just as intelligent as the average commoner anyway. So it's going to go ahead and shoot as many people as it can, and that is terrifying. Once you add up all of this stat block here, the fact that its attacks are super deadly, the fact that people are turning on each other, the breath weapon is disgusting, you know, this thing's got a high-ish AC, and it's got a decent amount of hit points, this thing is truly a monster. Mind you, keep into consideration the damage over time. Of course, it doesn't seem like much, 5 hit points in this town, 10 hit points in that town, but that will make the difference, I promise you. More often than not, when your players go ahead and deliver that finishing blow to this dragon, they are going to meet it just barely, right? And if they only just beat it by, 2-3 hit points, then they can go ahead and say, oh, it's because of that town's contribution that you were able to destroy the dragon. Once your players have finally done it, they've tracked this thing down multiple times, they've gone ahead and delivered the finishing blow, or they just went ahead and, met it at Bryn Shander, and they have one epic fight with it, they drop this thing to 0, and it's going to explode in a shower of chardylyn. And hopefully, with the destruction of the dragon, the 10 towners will finally be safe. But, of course, your players are going to have to deal with the aftermath. How many people did they save in total? That entirely depends on their interactions with the dragon. Were they able to go to one of the towns early and save a decent amount of the people? Were they able to stop the Duergar from assassinating key figures? Or did your players go ahead and not bother with that and just stayed at Bryn Shander the whole time and let pretty much the rest of the world burn? There is a decent amount of bookkeeping in regards of this chapter in how many people survive and where the survivors go, what happens with the Duergar, what happens with the dragon, what happens with the individuals at Sunblight. There is a lot of things going on here, and you are going to have to go ahead and keep track of it all. But thankfully, you can usually hand wave a lot of the numbers because your players, more often than not, aren't going to be interested in how many numbers there are. But if you have one of those groups, then you already know them, and you should probably keep all that into consideration. So what happens if your players aren't able to stop this dragon by the time it destroys Bryn Shander and it flies all the way back to Sunblight? Well, it just arrives back at Sunblight. But here's the thing. If your players already dealt with all the Duergar at Sunblight, what happens then? If your players killed all of the Duergar in all of Sunblight, then the dragon's just going to sit there and it's not going to be able to get repaired, and it's just going to sit there, It's not going to have anything to do. If your players killed the Sunblight clan and were able to put the Moosgard clan into power, then you have to consider, what is Moosgard going to do with this dragon? She is not stupid, right? She's not going to throw away this awesome weapon that she's got at her command. But at the same time, she doesn't want to destroy the 10 towns. She doesn't even care about the 10 towns, really. So let's say your players deal with the Sunblight clan, head over to the towns, and the dragon gets away with it and heads back to Sunblight, and your players go ahead and chase it back to Sunblight. You're going to have to consider, what is the Moosgard clan going to do with the dragon and with the players? I'm sure that a lot of people would want vengeance on that dragon, but, unfortunately, if your players were at Sunblight Citadel and had to fight a whole bunch of Duergar in the fortress and the dragon, that might be a deadly fight. If your players didn't kill the Sunblight clan, and in fact they're still chilling there, and your players were not able to stop the dragon, then the dragon's going to go ahead and hop back in, it's going to get fixed up, and when you know it, then Zardarok is going to go ahead and release it again, and he's going to kill all the 10 towners, and his eventual plan is to go ahead and storm the Dwarven Valley and kill all of the dwarves there. We sadly don't get any information in regards of the dragon getting released again, but it's presumed to be likely, right? Because why wouldn't they? We don't get any information really in this entire book on the Dwarven Valley. We get whopping like 2 paragraphs. So if you're going through that, your players haven't dealt with the Zardarok clan, and they will be unleashing the dragon upon the Dwarven Valley, you're going to have to start thinking of how your players are going to interact with the Dwarven Valley, or how at least the world is going to interact with the Dwarven Valley. Very short chapter here, but there is a lot to take in. And what's also very important is the fact that this chapter is, one, wrapping up the Duergar little subplot here, but at the same time, it's introducing this huge plot that we have with O'Real, where your players are going to have to go to O'Real's abode, then go through the Caves of Hunger, and then eventually find themselves in the lost city of Netheril. So once your players have dealt with the dragon and they feel comfortable enough, i.e. that they're high level enough, then Vellynne is going to go ahead and say, hey, it's time to go. Let's go ahead and go to O'Real's abode and steal us a codicil of white, and then we can go ahead and do what I need to do here. And the information that we get here is the information that is going to really be able to give your players the exposition to go and do what they need to do to stop O'Real's everlasting winter. This is what they need. They need a MacGuffin, and they need to know the fact that O'Real possibly can be beaten, and of course that your players can find something to beat her with. She's also going to talk about the Professor Orb that was stolen from her, and she's going to go ahead and say, hey, one of my colleagues stole it, and I know one of my colleagues was heading over to O'Real's abode. We find O'Real's abode, we can probably find the Professor Orb, which is true. If your players head to O'Real's island, then they can possibly find the Professor Orb, which is incredibly good exposition. And once your players are finally ready to step off and hit the A plot of this entire adventure, then they have to find a way to get to that island, which thankfully, if they explore around or talk to enough people, there is multiple ways that they can get there. So of course, as I stated before, never have an NPC that is unkillable, because that's just stupid. So what happens if Vellynne dies? Well, it doesn't need to be Vellynne to introduce your players to the concept that there is this MacGuffin in this world that can stop O'Real. It doesn't need to be Vellynne that is the one driving them along. It doesn't need to be her. It can be any one of the Arcane Brotherhood members, and of course, it could be the fact that your players just find a journal on Vellynne, and this journal goes into supreme detail about what's going on here. Never write a story that is dependent on a single individual in the whole world, in the world of D&D, because if you slap hit points onto a character, they can die. So alternatives, of course, to having Vellynne be the one to giving this quest is Zan's simulacrum shows up and says, hey, I want to go ahead and make my way to Ythryn because maybe there's some awesome magic in there waiting that I can use. If your players already met with Avarice, then she can be the one to introduce your players to all this information, because she can go ahead and say, hey, you guys look pretty tough. I'll go ahead and use you for a bit. And maybe your players like getting stepped on, and that's okay. Instead of having a dead Arcane Brotherhood member, your players can go ahead and meet Nas Lantomir, and that could be a fun exchange where Nas Lantomir is this portent diviner, and she can go ahead and say, hey, I saw into the future and I saw good things waiting for you if you join me. I will be making an entire video about each individual member of the Arcane Brotherhood and how to incorporate them in this entire campaign, and obviously I will be going into detail on how you can have them be the ones to give your players all this information. So it doesn't really matter who is the one giving this information. All that matters is the delivery. The players need to believe that this is real. They need to believe that there is a way that they can stop the everlasting winter, and they need a reason to believe that they are the ones that can pull this off. But of course, that will all be covered in Chapter 5, O'Real's Abode. That is going to do it for the Chapter 4 video here. Once again, a lot to go over, and unfortunately, rules as written, 10 towns is pretty much screwed. But it doesn't have to be screwed, of course. You can fudge a lot of things, you can move numbers back, you can have your players interact with the dragon at Sunblight. There's a lot of different ways you can go ahead and handle this adventure. My two biggest gripes with the chapter is, one, as written, 10 towns is screwed, and two, they actually don't go too much into the aftermath of what happens with the 10 towners. What happens if, the majority of the towns are destroyed? What are you going to do then? What are the 10 towners going to do? The place is no longer going to be really called 10 towns, is it? Because some of the places got obliterated. And more often than not, a decent amount of the population has been killed. So are they going to go ahead and just move into some of the bigger towns? Is, Targos, Bryn Shander, and East Haven, are they now going to be the three only towns left in this place that are populated? You're going to have to think about a lot of this if things go down the way that they do. But of course, if you fudge things and move things around and make it so your players can stop this dragon before they inflict too much damage, then you don't have to worry about that as much. So go ahead and tell me, what are your plans for Chapter 4 here? I want to know because, once again, I know every DM is going to handle this chapter differently. So many things can go down here, so many ways that your players can interact with the dragon, so many people that they can potentially save or lose, and also so many ways you can exposition to your players the fact that they need to go to O'Real's Island. I want to know how you introduce these things because I love, seeing all this and I love comparing it to what I do. In my game, of course, I had Vellynne and the rest of the Arcane Brotherhood show up much earlier and already drop hints that there's a city floating around this place. But this individual chapter, of course, showed us how much death and destruction is awaiting, and maybe, the winter isn't something that is an immediate necessity. But you should be pressing in on that immediate necessity. At some point, you should press on the fact that, the winter is going to eventually get so cold that people aren't going to be able to live up here. And that is going to be the driving force for your players to put a stop to the everlasting winter. That's going to do it for me. If you liked all the information I was putting out here, go ahead and subscribe and like and comment. And go ahead and tell me all about everything that you're doing because I love hearing all this information. I just cannot wait to dive into the future chapters that are going on around here and diving into the individual NPCs because there is so many great chapters to come, so many great NPCs to dive into, and lots of adventure to had. Thank you all for watching, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.